as always with the offseason, free agency comes first. So we're going to talk about what striking out in free agency would mean exactly and how bad it really could get and how bad it could really affect the rest of the offseason and the draft. Matt, go ahead.
So when you think of how JD has built this roster, or at least through free agency last year, you had two big free agent signings. You had Lawson, and you had Corey Davis. But then everybody else was kind of depth and solid bargain chip players that he found that fit the scheme, fit what his vision was, and he sort of filled out the roster with these guys. So who are those guys this year, and what would happen if he struck out on those guys? What we see as those guys would be Barrios, Moses, and LDT. Now, if he strikes out on these guys, it goes beyond just who we think would fit this team, who would help build this team. You also have guys like Barrios that the fans love, and you have a guy like Barrios who fills a need on special teams that we haven't had since Andre Roberts, who we let go. And once we lose a strength on special teams, it's automatically filled by a giant void that never really gets filled, or it's filled with a hodgepodge of guys that never really pans out. Just look at kicker this year. How many different kickers did we have this year? So return man, I feel, is very similar. We finally have a guy we can rely on to be a solid spark on special teams. And to lose Barrios in free agency, I think would be a huge strikeout. It would upset the fan base, losing a guy they love, and it would just set us back to zero at the position. And on top of that, it goes against bringing back people that work well with Zach Wilson. He needs people around him that he can rely on, and I don't think there was anybody he could rely on more last year than Barrios. So losing Barrios, I think, is the top loss, the biggest strikeout that can happen.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that is tops of the list of worst guy to not have, without a doubt. Like you mentioned, special teams, in all areas of special teams, it's like you don't know what you got till it's gone. And then the second it's gone, you miss it. And that we felt that this year with kicker, like you said. And I really think we would feel it next year with the return game, because that was one thing that the Jets really didn't have to deal with this year, is that they had pretty decent starting field position for most of their offensive drives. And oftentimes it was because Barrios would return a kick to the 30, or he would get to 17 yards on a punt return, and those yards matter. And the fact that the rest of the league and his players and his peers voted him an all-pro as a returner, that speaks volumes. That speaks to how good this guy really is. So I'm on board with you that he would be the number one worst guy to lose. And after him, it's Morgan Moses. This team needs a backup tackle with the future of Mekhi Becton, George Fant injury histories, and just for depth purposes in general, because offensive linemen get hurt all the time. They need someone to be a backup. And I really don't think, and you really don't think, we've talked about this on air, and we'll get to this more when we do our draft. We don't think that the loser of the left tackle battle, as it is right now between Becton and Fant, we don't think the loser of them is getting benched outright. We think the loser is going to play right tackle, and that both of these guys will be starting. And it's just a matter of where they will be starting, not who will be starting at all. So if that's the case, you need someone that's comfortable being in a backup role. We don't know if Morgan Moses is. Maybe he would like to test free agency again and get the chance to start after getting the chance to play so much with the Jets when he wasn't really expecting to at first. He came in for a competition. But if he isn't brought back, you have to fill that role with somebody. And whether it's another veteran or whether it's somebody in the draft, hopefully you can do it by just re-signing Morgan Moses. If not, I think you have to find some other veteran stopgap in free agency as a depth tackle. Otherwise, you're going to be forced into it with a decently high draft pick. And that's kind of the theme, is what we're going to continue to talk about with striking out in free agency. What we mean by that is not getting starting caliber players or important depth players at really key positions that don't line up with where the Jets want to allocate their draft resources, where it makes more sense for them to attack specific positions in free agency than it does with draft picks, depending on the order, the rest of the teams, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into a situation where, specifically talking about offensive tackle, you have to draft an offensive tackle as a backup early. Or for people that are wondering about drafting someone like Ika Mekwanu or Charles Cross, et cetera, earlier in the draft, if you draft one of them, then that means either Mekhi Becton or George Fant is on the bench when they lose the tackle job, because the fourth overall pick isn't going to not start as the fourth overall pick, or you took a player fourth overall for them to be a backup. Either way, it doesn't really align with the plans of this current team. And it really doesn't make sense for the Jets to put themselves in a position where they have to draft a lineman high to be a backup. I would much rather give them a situation where they can draft somebody in the third round that's a developmental tackle, and they can work on being a backup because they signed somebody in free agency to match up and be that backup immediately, not have to force potentially a rookie into a starting role by one injury. And we saw how much one injury can affect the offensive line this past season. So after Berrios, I think it's definitely Morgan Moses in terms of most important from there. And those are the two guys really where losing them in particular, that's really going to hurt.